track, that you can take some further training to really focus on your role. If you're a project manager, there's a track for you. If you're a tester, there's a track for you. If you're a developer, there's, if you're a senior, even if you're a senior manager, there's a track for you, which is like, kind of the Agile for senior managers.
I see.
And then they
so it introduces, it's a hands-on session, really.
Yeah, I mean, and this session here really is it's aimed at, what I've done is I've aimed at people who are just are going to be new to Agile or have heard about it and want to find out more, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So this isn't like, it's not a training course. It really is just the essence of Agile in a very short number of slides, and it really is just you come along, find a bit more about it, because a lot of people, they're starting to hear about Agile in their organisations and wondering what the hell is it, how's it going to affect me, what does it mean to me, that sort of thing.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's what this is about, really. And on the side, we do this the full IC Agile certified training thing as well. So I'll mention that at the end of the slideshow. I've got one slide in which kind of I'll just talk about that, and just briefly, and say, look, if anyone wants to find out more, just get in touch, sort of thing.
For sure.
Cool. How are we doing? So yeah, sort of 15 minutes to go or something. So
yeah, about 15 minutes to go.
Yeah, cool. Okay then.
Andrew won't want to open them. So, cheers, Rob. Cheers, later.
Hi, Graham.
Hello, Tilly.
It's Gus, yeah. Just
Oh, Gus, sorry, Gus.
yeah, about 2 minutes to go, so we'll just
Okay.
we'll be getting ready to start off.
Yeah, well, I'm sat here, so I'm ready as soon as you are. So I'm just, yeah, you just go when you're ready to go, and then tell me to get started.
All right, we'll do. So when you give the signal to me,
Yeah, sure. We've got about a minute, so
mm-hmm.
let's just wait for you people to come in.
Sure.
Okay, we're going to start now, so I'm just going to press start broadcast.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Agile Fundamentals. Today's speaker is Graham Dick from Lamri. Graham is the co-owner of Lamri, a specialist process improvement business. He has also been involved with Agile and its evolution since the mid-90s, and over that time has worked with many organizations, both small and very large, assisting them adopt and adapt Agile to ensure they obtain value from the approach. This talk is taken from Lamri's IC Agile certified training classes and is focused on describing the fundamentals of Agile. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to Graham.
Okay, thank you very much, Gus. Good afternoon, everybody. As Gus was saying, yeah, this talk really is aimed at it's just a bare bones on the basics of Agile, and it's really aimed ideally at those who are kind of very new to Agile and want to kind of get a flavour of what it's about. There's an awful lot of talk about it in the industry and a lot of really good success stories. And I guess Agile is starting to go a lot wider now into the enterprise, and a lot of folks are starting to come across it and go, well, you know, what is this Agile thing, and what's it do? And this talk is kind of aiming to sort of answer that question. Okay, so what we're going to talk about basically is kind of very briefly, what's the problem that Agile is addressing? You know, kind of what's the need? Why is it there? Then we're going to talk a bit about what is Agile. Then we'll kind of look a bit further under the hood and sort of say, well, what are the kind of ingredients? Some of the ingredients that kind of make up Agile and make Agile what it is. And then very lastly, a couple of slides looking at actually kind of doing Agile. Okay, the traditional approach to kind of building software is all kind of works around kind of saying, okay, what we've got here is a kind of a rational engineering approach that assumes fundamentally that we can define the problem really crisply, and that we can actually deliver kind of really predictable results from a very formal process that methodically works through from kind of defining and understanding the problem to specifying what the solution should be in quite exhaustive, enough detail, should we say, not exhaustive necessarily, but enough detail that a developer can go away and implement it. Then we go off and implement that, and then we go test it, and hopefully we get convergence with what our kind of users actually wanted. The kind of result of that kind of thinking often results in a development process that kind of has a big kind of command and control focus to it. Has a lot of kind of idea of, well, grand design, I'll design it, specify it all up front, we'll design it all up front, we'll put an awful lot of time and energy into getting the specification right, getting the design and architecture right, such that when we go code it, test it, well, it will just work, won't it? we measure progress by assessing intermediate work products, like how far through are we on our design documents, our functional specs. Have I written all my test procedures yet? That sort of idea. And the kind of challenge, one of the kind of challenges of that approach is what it does is it kind of delays confirmation that I've kind of mitigated the absolutely critical risks. Because to a certain extent, in a kind of software world, it's only the delivery and production of working software that actually demonstrates that we've got something that works and that meets the customer's needs. And there's this kind of despite this kind of solid, sensible engineering approach, we still live in a kind of context in the world where our users find it immensely hard to specify in the detail that we're asking them to specify. There's this terrible we don't know what the thing should do until we see it doing some of that kind of syndrome. We often don't discover issues until right at the 11th hour, because it's when they're kind of codified in software that we go, oh gosh, that doesn't work now, that doesn't integrate, that doesn't build. We often get build and release issues. We often get stuff that fails to plumb together as we kind of thought it would, because we just missed the detail, really. And we've got an approach here that is quite resistant to changing requirements. And when you kind of tag that back to the first point, which is like people find as a rule it's really hard to specify up front in detail, you can see you've potentially got a problem there, because almost inevitably you're going to have changing requirements, simply because people just found it hard to actually write the things in the first place. And the result of this kind of straitjacket type of approach is that we often result in kind of big, major, unplanned lumps of work at the back end of the life cycle when we can least afford it. Okay, so what should we do? Well, I guess the answer is, what the Agile community kind of espouse is, kind of don't fight it, go with it as an approach. So what's that mean? It kind of means that instead of doing one great big kind of grand design, grand build, final integration, final test kind of approach, we'll just develop it iteratively. How do you eat a large elephant? You eat it chunk by chunk by chunk. So we'll apply that approach. We'll minimize the amount of upfront work, because people find that really hard to get their heads around. And what we'll do, and we'll actually incrementally and iteratively do the work of the project in a series of mini waterfalls, if you like. We'll continuously inspect, continuously test what we do, and we'll adapt and change as we get stuff. As we realize we can work smarter, we'll incorporate working smarter. And working in iterations gives us a wonderful framework there to build in this inspect and adapt cycle. We'll develop requirements at the point of consumption. In other words, we'll recognize that people find this immensely hard to kind of get locked off in a room for 1 week, 2 weeks, 6 weeks, and expected to write a mammoth requirement specification. Instead, what we'll do is we'll actually, at the point we're going to develop a requirement, that's where we'll engage with our users and say, okay, now what do we actually mean? Given the context of what we've developed to date and our ongoing journey of understanding what a solution looks like, what are the requirements? What's the requirement here? Continuously verify quality. So it's about test. Every iteration, you test what you've done in that iteration. And what's more, you regression test. So rerun the tests from the previous iterations, so we make sure that we haven't broken anything that we did previously. Embracing change, actually saying, change is actually a good thing if it actually converges. It converges us on a solution. Clearly, if we're not converging on a solution, then there's a more fundamental problem here. Perhaps we don't understand what it is we're delivering. But as long as we converge on a solution, then it's a good thing. And then self-managing teams is getting around this kind of grand design thing. It's a team of empowered individuals who are taking shared accountability for meeting their customer needs, and they all kind of organize themselves and to a certain extent pick tasks, negotiate tasks between themselves to actually deliver the whole. Okay, so now we talked about that, kind of what is Agile then a bit more. It kind of, Agile as a term was kind of coined early in the kind of 2000s, really as a kind of a reaction to a bunch of those challenges we've just been talking about. and the essence of it really is this kind of 4 points at the bottom here. It's kind of this idea of, well, it's interactions and individuals over processes and tools. So it's really getting at that people interaction is the kind of the richest form of communication. It's about working software over big documentation. So it's like software is king, the working stuff is king. That's what we're really being tested on. That's what we're really being asked to produce. So that should be that should be the focus. So it's kind of like do what you need to do to get to working software as quickly as you possibly can. Collaboration over formalizing through contract negotiation, and then respond to change over sticking slavishly to the plan. It's not to say that the point is the stuff on the right is valueless, far from it, but when you get to the trade-off, you're trying to stay on the left-hand side of those kind of continuums, but recognizing that stuff on the right definitely has value depending on context. So it's just trying to stay on the left-hand side is really what Agile is getting at. Okay, underneath those kind of manifesto points, there's a number of principles, and these are kind of some of them. In no particular order here. It's almost like you're looking for simplicity, striving for simplicity. What is the minimum amount of stuff we need to do to maximize the value delivered? Do that within the context of an iterative development approach where we run it in small, short bursts of work that then deliver tested working software, and that's a real definition of progress. Assessing progress there as via working software, not via how far through am I on this architecture document or test strategy document, for example. Face-to-face communication is the most effective way of communicating. So kind of this welcome conversation and collaboration, and it's not traditional project. Collaboration tends to be high at the very, very beginning of the project, drop right down to a low point, and then kind of get high right at the end. When we're in an agile project, what we try and do is we're trying to keep collaboration high right through the project, and it's through keeping that collaboration high between users and developers, and also within the development team itself, that we basically drive as quickly as possibly we can to what is the essence of the solution, and then start evolving and building that solution that matches most closely what our users want. And then, yes, another point at the bottom there, regular reflection and adaptation. So it's an opportunity here to every iteration and more often to actually just step back and say, are we doing stuff in the most effective way we can? What can we improve? What can we learn? How can we get better and more effective? So it's not about locking ourselves into approach and then into a death march, and we're going to walk this approach and work this approach, and it's never going to change for the next 2 years on some big project. It's about constantly flexing and changing and morphing and getting smarter and more effective as we learn. So it's a framework for not being afraid to try things out. You will develop your own agile process, your approach for doing agile in your organization, and that will be based on stuff like Scrum, elements from Scrum, elements from extreme programming, elements from all sorts of different practices. Agile goes back, actually, in reality, sort of 30-odd, 40-odd years, and there's an awful lot of practices in the toolbox from which you can borrow, beg, and steal to build and flesh out your, the way you do agile in your organization. And then doing agile is kind of one thing, and you can kind of learn that in a training class. And the first couple of times you work with agile, that's kind of what you do. It's kind of like, well, I've got a recipe and I'll follow the recipe. But the real kind of almost the big learning point to get to is when it's not so much about following the recipe, although that is important. It's about the kind of, well, understanding what agility means to us and keeping that in mind all the time, and then understanding when it's actually right to break the rules, when it's time to change the recipe, because simply the situation you're in is different, has morphed, it's moved. So it's about what do I need to do to maintain my agility what different practices do I need to pull in? How do I need to change the way I do particular things according to a different situation? It's been around for a long time, which is a really fascinating thing. When I first started researching this, I was absolutely amazed how long Agile's actually been around. It was actually used, believe it or not, iterative and incremental development was used as a technique to develop some of the control systems for the original Project Mercury, which was the kind of first US man in orbit around the Earth project way back in the back in the 60s. So they actually used some of these techniques way back then. But I guess what this slide is trying to show is that Agile comes from a rich heritage in the software world, but it's also borrowed from lessons learned in the manufacturing world as well. And so it really does. It's not about throwing out the old and welcoming the new. It's about evolving, choosing, borrowing from the past, and perhaps refreshing and refocusing within that Agile mindset and framework, such that we get a set of approaches that work today, that at the end of the day allow us to deliver better, faster and cheaper, which is ultimately what the premise of this is, what Agile will help us do. Well, you might ask, well, okay, yeah, we talked a bit about stuff, but what's it actually look like? What is Agile? What's it do? What's it look like? And this picture kind of is really trying to show that. I guess the best way of looking at it is if we start from the left. You can often think in terms of an iteration 0, which is a short bit of work, which is about identifying our initial backlog or the set of requirements. We'll talk a bit about what requirements mean in an Agile project shortly. A sort of high-level release plan, a kind of project charter, a reasonably high-level project charter about this is what it is, this is the problem we're solving, and this is what we're going to do to solve that problem. So it's kind of, are we fit to actually start going and developing now? Are we ready? And also, what do I need to do to set up my development environments and get that kind of up and fit for working? And you might kind of call that an iteration 0 kind of setup phase. And then what we do is we then jump into basically executing a number of iterations. And typically iterations last from between 2 to 4 weeks. Can be shorter, can be longer, depending on the size of the project and the number of teams, etc., you're working with. But typically between 2 and 4 weeks. And what do you do in an iteration? Well, primarily what you do is you do a little bit of planning. What are we actually going to do in this iteration? And that's based around, well, what stories are we actually going to implement in this iteration? We then actually, remember I'll talk about point-in-time collaboration. We then go and talk to our users and elaborate those stories that we're going to work on in this iteration. We then go and do some design, do some build and test, and do some user acceptance testing. And at the end then of that iteration, that short block of time, what I've got some production quality executable code that I can actually show to my users. Actually say, this is what we've done in the 2 weeks. This is what we've done in the 4 weeks. Is it right? Basically, does it meet your needs? Now, it's clearly not the full system. It's actually a fragment. It's a snapshot, or a slice through the final system. So that's the idea of an iteration showcase. And also, very, very importantly, we get the idea of a retrospective of sitting down as a team and saying, okay, what went well? What didn't go so well? What will we do different next time? And we also kind of get the option really of deploying, potentially deploying to production at the end of the iteration as well. And in principle, at the end of each iteration, we could deploy to production a slice of extra functionality, a slice of modified functionality. Many of the big sort of internet-based businesses, eBays and Amazons of the world, work just in this way. Every iteration they effectively deploy to production at the end of it. And then we kind of, simplistically, we're asking, are we done yet? Have we actually done enough to meet customer needs? In reality, we've got some sort of high-level release plan or schedule lined out, and we know that in reality we need to do 5, 6, whatever iterations to hit off the bulk of the really needed functionality, and then we're into, well, okay, where have we delivered enough? At what point can we stop? Can we close down? Because again, remember, the idea here is it's about delivering customer value and effectively doing the, almost doing the minimum we need to get the maximum customer value. So there's always a trade-off in here in terms of what's the appropriate point to stop the project so we can move on to the next thing, move on to the next lump of value that needs working on. Okay, so that's our kind of iterative life cycle. Inside that, you still might say, well, yeah, okay, but what goes on? Well, there's a whole bunch of different detailed practices that you can take from and incorporate, and they're kind of project and team practices, and they're also kind of technical practices. So the thing, a stand-up, it's a daily stand-up meeting. It's a simple project, project team practice, which is about standing up for 15 minutes and asking each team member, kind of saying, yeah, this is what I set out to do, this is what I've actually achieved, and this is the stuff that's kind of stopping me going forward. And this is what I then intend to do today. And it's just about a way of taking accountability for what you're going to do, and also sharing a problem. Who's best able to help me? And then saying, okay, we'll get together after this to help me solve my problem. We use stories which are promises for conversations to record our requirements rather than slavishly writing large requirements documents. We do relative estimation. Iteration, we plan our iterations. We do run showcases, like demonstrations at the end of each iteration. We think in terms of the definition of done. So what actually are the various things we need to do to actually consider I've closed my iteration and I can move on to the next phase. We actually have quite a metricated process here. We can actually have a progress which is demonstrated in terms of real software, real stories that are delivered. We can talk in terms of a nice project wall which visually shows this is the stuff, these are the stories we've got in our backlog, these are the refined stories, these are the stories allocated to various iterations, and this is their state of progress in various iterations. So we can make progress a very team-based, collaborative, visible thing. It's technical practices like pair programming, like test-driven development, like continuous integration. We'll talk about a few of these very, very briefly subsequently. So I guess the message from this slide really is that Agile is actually a whole collection of practices, and to a certain extent you can choose the practices that you feel will give you best value and at a particular point in time. And also that story will change over time. As you get more experience of Agile, you'll start putting in extra practices. You might give pair programming a try. Let's give that a try. It sounds barking mad, but let's give it a try and see if it works for us. It might work for you, it might not. Okay, the Agile team is kind of an interesting concept, because it's about, to a certain extent, trying to co-locate the key people that are needed to actually deliver the solution. Co-locate them such that they can collaborate more effectively, put people together. They actually start talking about things rather than sending emails, deferring, doing other stuff. They get focused, they get organized, and they work and collaborate together to actually rapidly deliver a solution. So it's about putting the core team together as much as we can, but also making them available the kind of people from the extended team that need to be involved with that. So, for example, subject matter experts, product owners who actually understand the solution and the product and have authority over the direction of that solution. Getting those guys involved so they're part of that core team, working on a day-to-day basis with the team, and really as part of the team. And then pulling in, if you're in a large organization, perhaps architecture people, other key stakeholders, such as they're available when they're needed to. We've got a kind of role there of an iteration manager, often sometimes called Scrum Master. And the idea is this guy is focused on the team, on the mechanics of the iteration, measuring progress, and getting obstacles moved out of the way, and coaching and facilitating the team to do Agile more effectively and be more effective themselves. So constantly kind of almost mentoring and coaching the team through the process of delivering that agile project. Sometimes we might find that actually we need to wrap around him and give him effectively a project manager, an agile project manager, to help support the team in the larger environment. So focusing on the resource, has the team got the resources, and looking at the alignment with project outcomes, for example. So we kind of get this idea, this kind of onion skin model really, where we've got the core team and then potentially an extended team that sits around them, helping them deliver. Okay, so look at some of the ingredients now. First ingredient is the idea of a story. And the really interesting thing about a story is you think of it in terms of it's a promise to have a conversation later. It's about deferring the detail, because you remember people are really poor at writing down all the detail when you first ask them to do it. They're quite good at kind of coming up with excuse me, stories, features if you like. You know, as a frequent flyer, I want to be able to see my points balance, so I can just think the reason I need it, so I can decide how to pay for my ticket. That's a structure for a story. People are quite good at that. You know, as a user of a jobs website, I want to be able to post my CV. That's a story. Great. Now, clearly there's not enough detail there to go about the business of writing some software, but the point is there's enough there that I can kind of get a feel for it, and it's a placeholder for some functionality, a placeholder particularly for a conversation to have at a later date, and I can allocate that story to a particular iteration. So we think in terms of writing requirements in terms of stories. And to kind of underpin a story, we kind of have this idea of 3 C's. Basically the card, and that comes from the idea that, again, following kind of this collaborative kind of visual approach, you know, just use index cards to write your stories on, because, you know, deliberately there's not much space there, so I can't write War and Peace on that index card. I can write a very brief, terse description of it, and I can also write up some kind of criteria about how would I know when I've completed that story. You know, what should be true when it's, you know, when it works, and that's the essence of my test criteria for that story. And primarily, the other C, the conversation bit, it's a placeholder for actually what will become a series of conversations between the appropriate users and the developers who are going to develop that, and the testers who are potentially going to write the tests for it and implement the tests. This series of conversations, the kind of first initial conversations occurring when the story is identified at a high level early in the project, and then further conversations and questions coming when we're actually estimating the story, saying, okay, how big is it? How long is it going to take us to do this? And then lastly, another series of conversations happening at the point of delivery, at the point of, okay, I've got to do this story now about posting a CV. What's this actually mean? What's it really, really mean? You know, and potentially at that point, come up with little user interface sketches, notes on what it actually needs to do, and specifically what are the test criteria that will pass. And those test criteria will then become the seeds of and the core of the actual unit tests that I'll write to actually test that we've done what we said we would do. There's a really interesting concept which creeps into agile development, which is this idea of a definition of done. And it's the trouble is done means many different things to different people, but it's fundamentally important to actually work out what does done mean for an iteration, because that allows us to estimate, because primarily done defines the amount of stuff I've got to do to get to the point where I can actually deliver some software. So does it mean I have needed to, you know, got a user story elaborated, I've written some code, and I've checked it into configuration management? Is that done? Maybe in addition, I've written some tests and I've implemented, the test. Is that done? I've actually then executed the test and the test passed. Is that done? Perhaps I also need to actually write some user help screens. Perhaps I also need to think in terms of, well, not only do I check it back into configuration management, but I pull it out and do a master build and deploy it onto a kind of a a raw test platform, and the tests have to pass on that. So, it's what level of done we actually need to achieve is very, very important. And this also becomes important when we're talking about working with third parties. If I've got third parties involved, then to a certain extent, meeting definition done is how they get paid. So getting a clear and good understanding of what done is very, very important for that. Estimating is something we actually do. We often use an approach called using story points. And the key behind this really is, it's a collaborative approach. So it's not something that is done to the Agile team. The Agile team does this to themselves. They estimate as a team. And to use this most powerfully, you think in terms of actually it's a relative measure. How big is this story compared with something we've already estimated? Is it double the size? Is it half the size? Is it 3 times the size? And incorporated into that estimate is all the stuff I need to get to done. And we've already previously defined what done means on our project. There's ways of doing this out there. One approach I really like is planning poker. Just go out and Google it if you want to. But the essence is you give your team a set of cards. The cards just have numbers on them, and they're based on a Fibonacci series, which basically means they're close together at lower down, and then the numbers get more and more spaced apart as they get bigger. So you kind of start 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, then to 8, then to 13, then to 21, then to 34, up to 50, then to 55, etc., etc. And really the idea there is to say that, as you're starting to get the bigger numbers there, you've clearly got more and more uncertainty creeping in there. So you're starting to say things like, well, do I really mean to say it's double the one that came, the previous story, really? And the idea is that with the approach is that we recognize that it's very easy to be kind of influenced adversely by other team members. So what we're doing is each person will have a discussion about a particular story, get a kind of consistent understanding of that story, then each person will basically place a card face down, which is their estimate. And often what we'll do, we'll then turn them all over together, and then the person who put the largest estimate and smallest estimate will kind of get a soapbox, get an opportunity to have a quick, this is why I believe it's this size, or these are the factors I believe, and then we kind of draw again. And the idea is to try and get to convergence, some sort of converged story that everyone can buy into on that particular story. Once we've kind of estimated our stories, we can lay them out over a number of iterations. And that allows us to actually be able to start saying, well, we're delivering these kind of features at these particular points in time, and also to be able to actually, effectively work out, how much is it going to cost to do the project. So it's a high-level plan. We've already kind of looked at the this deliver and deploy picture, but now we'll kind of just dig inside of it and say, well, what actually kind of happens? What actually goes on again inside there? What's the actual pulse of it? So here's a chart which is it's a 10-day iteration. So what happens in that iteration? So at the top I've got my kind of chart running from left to right, with each day, and then beneath that I've got the backlog, which is basically my set of stories. It's the stuff we've got to deliver on the project. So here we go. We've got stories 1 through 9, and we've got 3 things we call epics. And what we mean by those are basically they're things we recognise that they're basically still stories, but actually we recognise that actually they're placeholders because they're quite complex things. For example, one of those might be user can post her CV onto the jobs website. Now you kind of think, well, yeah, that's a story. And then you dig in a bit deeper and you think, well, actually, no, that's an epic, because when you dig into it, you realise that actually there's stuff in there about, well, the CV can include an education, a job history, the objectives, desired salary, etc., etc. A user can mark the CV as inactive. A user can have several CVs. A user can edit the CV. A user can delete the CV, etc., etc., etc. That's why it's an epic. It's actually a placeholder for a bunch of stuff that we haven't kind of identified yet. Then we've got a bunch of stories as well, which are kind of a bit more pinned down, and we can work with those. So what do? and kind of in the project, really, the idea is we've got to get into a kind of a heartbeat and a rhythm. The first day is typically iteration planning. So it's looking at our backlog. It's identified, we've already roughly identified what stories we're going to implement in the current iteration. And then it's kind of saying, okay, well, what do we need to do to implement those stories? What design work do I do? What implementation work? What test work? Maybe what documentation work? You know, that sort of thing. What deployment work? How do I need to change? You know, is there anything I need to do to change to test harnesses? All that sort of stuff that I need to think about. The stuff we need to do to deliver those stories. So that's what we do in iteration planning. And we'll also allocate either complete stories or individual tasks to members of the team. Members of the team will say, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, which is back to this idea of a collaborative team that kind of self-organize. So the team will say, yeah, I'm responsible, I'll take this particular story or this other story, and I'll go and do the stuff that's needed to actually deliver it. You then get into a cycle where we do some work each day. We have a daily stand-up each day. And again, when you do that is up to you. Some people like to do that first thing in the morning. Others like to do it at the end of the day. I've come across both. And it's basically saying, well, okay, what did I commit to do? What have I actually achieved? What are any blockers that are in my way? And what am I going to do next, so to speak? It's short, it's sharp, it's brief. And the reason it's a stand-up because standing up is uncomfortable for a long time, therefore encourages us to move on. And it's something that should be treated with a bit of respect. It's kind of one of the key kind of formal collaborative kind of effort really on the project. And so we're basically going each day, we do some task work, having our stand-up, which is our kind of control. And then day 10, we're doing a wrap-up, and then we're presenting what we've done to our users. So we've actually got some real production quality code that works, and we can actually show people what we've achieved in that iteration. And then also we've got the opportunity, the opportunity to learn what went right, what went wrong. So for example, in the example here, what have we actually achieved? We've actually achieved all the kind of, all the tasks from story 1, all the tasks from story 2, and one of the tasks from story 3. So what's that actually mean? Yeah, and we've failed to do tasks 9 and 10. So what's that mean? It means we haven't delivered story 3. So in this iteration, we've just managed to deliver story 1 and story 2, and we've failed to deliver story 3. So what happens then? Well, it means that story 3 is uncompleted, and what it means is that story 3 goes back on the backlog. And what that actually means is I've actually bitten off a little bit too much in this iteration. In reality, we couldn't quite do as much as we thought we could do. And this is a perfectly normal situation when you start an Agile project. In the early first 1 or 2 iterations, you don't actually know the term is your velocity. You don't understand how many story points you can deliver in an iteration. And to be blunt, you guess at it. You either work from previous experience, or if you've got a brand new team and a brand new environment, you guess at it and say, well, what's reasonable? And you'll get this wrong the first time. You'll overestimate. You'll actually put too much into the iteration and you won't deliver it. So what you do know is you've then got an idea for how much you can do in an iteration, so you can replan and reallocate stories to iterations to balance them out to more of what you can actually achieve in the iteration. And the next iteration, you'll get a lot closer to that, and probably by the iteration 3, iteration 3 or 4, you'll be on the nail and you'll be by and large delivering what you commit to deliver each iteration. And that's called understanding your velocity, and actually kind of nailing your velocity, so you can then track that over time. One of the other practices in Agile is test-driven development, which it's an immensely powerful approach to delivering software. And primarily, again, it's like a lot of these things. It sounds really impressive. It's not rocket science, though, but it's immensely powerful. And it comes from this perhaps daft but effective approach of, well, okay, what I do first is I actually write my test. Remember we talked about our 3 C's on our user story. There we've also, we had our effectively the quality criteria. What does it mean to deliver this story successfully? That is the kernel. That's the kernel of the test. So I can write a test, compile test. The idea here being I've got some sort of automated test harness I'm adding tests into and building, make the test actually compile successfully and run, and surprise, surprise, because I've run the test first with no actual code underneath it, it's going to fail. And that's the idea. That's the red light there. So what do I do then? I then write some implementation. I implement some solution, but just enough to make the test pass. So I'm focusing here on simplicity, and then I'm allowed to actually, okay, I now get to improve the design quality, but always rerun the test and make sure the test passes. And sometimes I'll improve design quality and I'll break the test, so then I fix and rerun. And the idea really being here is that I try and run these in lockstep, write just enough tests to make the test pass, so what's a sensible next test, and then write the code to deliver that, to actually make that test work, and kind of cycle around. And experienced developers, when they're working in this approach, you're talking in terms of the cycle time here of minutes, not of hours. This isn't big drama stuff. It's small unit test, write the code necessary to make that go, and then cycle there until you get your green light. And really the power of this, the immense power of this, is that you kind of get your test harnesses and your regression testing for free with this approach, because it's just part of development. You know, I don't just go coding for 6 months and then expect some poor blighters in the test department to conjure up tests to test everything. Testing becomes part of what we do. It's run in parallel, in lockstep. And as I reach the end of my project, I've got a big suite of automated regression tests that all pass. So, you know, in contrary to your perhaps your standard kind of more waterfall type project, with an agile project, you've actually got some of the most tested software you've ever had in the organization, you know, ready to go. You can be immensely confident in its stability simply because it's been tested so hard, and it's been tested so hard as it works, you know, as it works literally through the development life cycle. Continuous integration is another immensely powerful technique, and very, very briefly, the idea being here that developers work in their own sandpits. They change some code, unit test it, and then they promote the code effectively back onto a main branch where continuous integration software is running, which will pick up, detect a change, automatically rebuild, potentially deploy onto some sort of test box, and then run regression tests on it automatically. And then it can publish statistics, it can email people, you know, with this. And this is an immensely powerful approach for dealing with those challenges of late integration that are so often bedevil standard waterfall projects, stuff that doesn't bolt together because some developer went off down this wormhole on the branch for weeks on end and basically broke stuff without realizing it. This actually hits it nailed right on the head. I mean, this is something, it's not, again, this sounds new, but it's not. It's been around for donkey's years. I was using this when I used to work for a large telecommunications organization back in the, let's think now, this is very early 1990s. That organization had a mainframe-based configuration management tool, and we basically had daily build on it, a daily build and smoke test. And you went off and checked out your particular application, made some changes, and then checked it, you know, tested it, and then checked it back into configuration management, merged it onto the main branch, and then it would be picked up in that night's automated build and smoke test. And you know, if you broke the build, people got emailed about it, so you made sure you didn't break the build, because that was a big deal. But it was a fantastic thing for driving quality, you know, quality into the product. So that's continuous integration. Now, doing Agile is kind of interesting. What I've got here is something we use for a lot of our customers, just to give them an idea, well, how do I actually get started doing Agile? Well, think of it in terms of 4 phases. First of all, I've got a concept phase, very short. It's about identifying and validating the idea we've got. When we're clear on that idea, we go into an initiate phase, which again, very short, is about just clarifying the idea, doing some high-level estimates and some planning. And when I'm clear on that, go into a deliver phase, which is the bulk of the project, where I run my iterations, iteration after iteration after iteration, to incrementally build that working solution until I've finally done enough that my customer users are happy. Then I close out the project, ready for my next either next major release or next problem to solve. Looking at that a little bit, one more slide in more detail. It's concept, initiate, deliver and deploy, potentially a series of releases there, and then a close. And look at the percentages: 5% for concept of the total duration, 10% for initiate, 80% for deliver and deploy. That's where we're doing all the work. These really are very small, short little steps just to do enough to make sure we're ready to go. And coincidentally, they dovetail in beautifully into most organizations' existing governance frameworks. So it's a kind of useful tool for bolting Agile into an existing organization. And lastly, a lot of this material is pulled out of our 3-day Agile Fundamentals class. We follow an approach from an organization called IC Agile, which we really like, really because they've taken Agile to the various different roles that typically appear in the main larger organizations. So we've got a track. You can do Agile Fundamentals at the heart of it, at the bottom there, and then pursue tracks, which are focused on your particular role and your particular interests, like, for example, Agile coaching, like Agile development, like management, like business value management. So your product owners, your business analysts have got a track for you. Even for senior leadership team, there's a track for them. So it's kind of an approach we like, and increasingly customers are starting to say this actually fits with the way we want to work here. So if you're any more interested in that, just don't hesitate to drop me a line. And that really was that. So we finished about on time. If anyone's got any questions, there's a little questions panel on the kind of webinar control screen that you can just type in a question. So I guess we'll kind of hang around probably for a couple of minutes, and if anyone wants to post a question, then please feel free, and I'll do my best to answer.
We would like to thank Graham for the presentation. We'll just wait a couple of minutes if anyone's got questions that they would like to ask.
This question here is saying, will the slides be available? Gus, I'm happy to make them available.
Yes, we'll make the slides available as well as the recording after the webinar.
Okay.
Okay. There are no further questions. We'd like to thank everyone for joining today's webinar. We'll make the recording available afterwards and send you all a link. We look forward to having you at a future webinar. Thank you all. Bye.
Okay, thank you everyone.